what is a fourth turning, and are we in one?
Definitely. Yeah, we're in Nashville at the Bitcoin conference. Trump speaks tomorrow.
Yes.
It feels like the energy is ramping up. So
Yes.
I'm with you. It's the time.
Fresh off the assassination attempt as well. So this should be a pretty lit day tomorrow when Trump speaks.
Can't believe he's here.
Yeah.
We've come a long way, by the way, as a
Yeah.
Bitcoin community, if there is a Bitcoin community. So what is the fourth turning? Two historians / demographers started researching generations in demography and history in the 80s. And through that process, they were essentially identifying a unique pattern that emerged throughout history around these unique cohorted groups of humans called generations. We have the millennials, Gen X, boomers, et cetera. And their overarching thesis is essentially that a group of people are all born around the same time. And so the conditions in which they came of age was similar. So they were born in the same point in history. For us, it might be things that shaped us might be 9/11, the global financial crisis, growing up in the 90s, things like that. And then we all come of age together and we sort of cement this cohort. We have the same general hopes, fears, ambitions. And when we then grow up in the world as a cohort, we can sort of predictably, how we interact with the world as adults is somewhat predictable because we're sort of forged as a cohort. And then what they noticed was that after one type of cohort is born and he gives archetypes to each one, very predictably the next generation rebels against their parents.
Yeah.
If you have kids or you were a kid yourself, you probably know what this feels like. So then all of a sudden there's the next generation is predictable, that same archetype. And then they found that there's a cycle of 4 archetypes. And wow, this thing goes back since the beginning of America. And we can start to examine the mood of society based on the constellation of these archetypes. Is the hero in charge or is the artist in charge? And then you kind of look at the 4 periods and it kind of looks like spring, summer, fall, and winter. And then you look at the 4 stages of human life. You're a child, then you're a young adult, then you're midlife, and then you're an elder. And each of those stages have very predictable roles in society. And so you start to look at this and it does feel like this emergent human cycle. It's some sort of a weird biological thing, but also humans are a social species. So you combine this together and somehow order emerges out of these patterns.
Wow.
And so they came through this realization. They published their first book in I think it was the early 90s. Presidents were recommending it. It was a very big deal. And then in 1997, they published The Fourth Turning, which was very focused on the cycles. Same year as The Sovereign Individual.
Right.
Both of these books predicted tremendous amounts of the future. And since then, one of the co-authors has died. The other one, Neil Howe, is still alive. I talk to him now about this stuff, which is quite fun. But that's the essential thesis. And it came into my life during the pandemic, summer-ish of 2020. I'm cooped up inside. The world's going crazy. Honestly, I was a little manic trying to make sense of the world. I can't help myself. I need to understand things, or the illusion of understanding things. And I came across this book and it started to make sense. Or I could start to answer the questions like, why are my friends, family, neighbors submitting to this authority that is so clearly corrupt? Why would we possibly do what they're telling us? It's madness. Why would my neighbor tell on my other neighbor because there's too many cars in the driveway for Thanksgiving? And in my head, we're America, we stand up for what's right. And maybe that's me projecting on what I want to see. But I quickly found out that we're a social species that is ripe to be controlled. Yeah. And again, very frustrating, hard time. The thesis made sense. And I go, oh, okay. The fourth turning is that the end of that four stage cycle. Right. And what we find at the end of a long human life, 80, 90 years, is that we look around and we realize that we can't trust the institutions anymore. The exterior world is crumbling, from politics to business to media to any institution that holds society together. And what is our collective instinct as a group? We say, wow, we really need to fix the exterior world. It's so bad that I'm willing to do crazy things. Anything's on the table. I'm willing to make extreme sacrifice. I'm willing to get in line and take the jab of who knows what just for the greater good, even though it makes no logical sense. And so then you create the climate there. And it just so happens that that's the same climate that makes us ripe for war. And then you look back over the last 500 years and the end of this cycle, what he calls the fourth turning, the fourth quadrant there, that's when every single total war in American history has happened in a fourth turning. And every fourth turning has had total war. And so if we look back at the previous fourth turnings, we're in one right now, we'll get to that. The previous one was between 1929 and 1945. So it kicks off with the stock market collapse. Then we have the 1930s, the Great Depression. Somehow FDR gets elected. We have the communists versus the fascists in America. The whole idea of Western liberal democracy and capitalism was under question. You're watching them fall one by one in Europe. And what happens? We do crazy things as a government. We decide deficit spending is okay for the first time. All the people are scared, so we give them Social Security. We give them FDIC insurance. Don't worry, the banks aren't going to do this again. Then obviously we find ourselves into World War II. And what happens? You have this communism, fascism fight in America, and all of a sudden we immediately mobilize into action after Pearl Harbor. The whole country focuses on the new enemy, and we actually form really tight community bonds. And so we shatter this fractured energy and we become one strong force because now it's existential. And that's what we want. We know we have to make the trade. We go to war. And then at the end of that period, the entire world is reimagined. Just slam the chessboard down and reset all the pieces. We get Bretton Woods, we get NATO, we get the World Bank. Essentially an entire new structure is formed. And that is one period of the fourth turning. What's after that? The first turning. And all of a sudden the mood shifts. We're sick of fighting. We get Leave It to Beaver, white picket fences, a society of equality and also really boring culture. And that's the pendulum swinging away from fourth turning energy into this. We have a demand for stability. You go a little bit farther, and the kids of that stable era, what do? They rebel against their parents. They create the civil rights era, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And that's midway through the cycle. We reimagine our interior world. So again, every 80 years from the 60s back, you end up in this religious movement, essentially. It can take different forms, but you have the Puritans, you have essentially awakenings of different flavors. And that's, again, back to the generational archetypes. The constellation is ripe for the idealistic individuals, the boomers, also called the prophets. They're the ones coming of age and steering culture. Then we go into the third turning, which is a period of what he calls the unraveling. All of a sudden, economics are pretty good. Institutions are starting to crumble and everybody kind of knows it, but we're all doing okay, so who cares? This is massive deregulation. This is the 80s and the 90s and the early aughts. Then we get global financial crisis. That transitions us into the new fourth turning, kind of like 1929. Then we go through a period where we have cancel culture, eat the rich, raising taxes, again, just like we did in the 30s. We have the left versus the right, and they genuinely believe that both parties will destroy America. And so again, we're setting up these conditions for another climax period, usually war, probably war, preferably not, but if I'm betting, that's what I'm betting on. And here we are right in the middle of it. And the author believes, I think he was on a recent show, he said we're a 6 out of 10 on ramping. And
to war.
To the climax, which we assume is, it doesn't need to be war by definition, but it needs to be sufficiently mobilizing that people, the left and the right, can band together. Now, at the same time, if you look back, it's not always a war abroad, right? And even looking at the Revolutionary War, we think it's over tax over tea and it's like against the Brits, but more lives were lost between the Loyalists and the Patriots, Americans versus Americans, way more than the Redcoats. So that was kind of a hybrid thing. And in every fourth turning, we flirt with throwing away democracy, we flirt with civil war, and it's on a knife edge where we go. And the scary thing right now is we have an incredible debt problem as well. So we're in for a big one as far as I can tell. And I think you ask the average person, they feel it.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.